Hey folks, welcome to another exciting edition of Israel Explained. Today we're going to be talking about negotiations going on in two different places at the same time. We have talks going on in Qatar over a ceasefire with between Israel and Hamas, and we also have talks that are about to commence between Israeli officials and Biden administration officials over what a operation in Rafah is going to look like. So we have both of those things going on at once, and both of those talks could determine the outcome of this entire war. So they're very important. As far as the talks with Hamas are going, we'll start with that. The Israeli delegation that went over to Qatar a couple of days ago has already returned, or the heads of the delegation have returned, I should say. Nitzan Alon of the IDF and Dedi Barnea of the Mossad have returned to brief the cabinet about what was going on there. It sounds like the briefings they gave were very pessimistic. There are wide gaps between Hamas and Israel over the conditions of a ceasefire, but perhaps more importantly, the Israeli delegation is really not convinced that Yahya Sinwar actually wants to reach a ceasefire and isn't just trying to waste time and hoping that Israel will get into more trouble with international public opinion and force it to stop on conditions that are better for it. Meanwhile, Netanyahu, in closed talks that were leaked, as always, in the Security and Foreign Policy Committee in the Knesset said, quote, "You have to be tough in negotiations. You can't give everything right away because then the enemy will want more." The Israeli team in Qatar is reporting that the emphasis that Hamas is putting right now is on the issue of the returning Palestinian refugees going back to the north. The prisoners is something that they're currently seem to be placing at a lower priority. But the prisoners are a massive issue too. And Hamas is demanding that it get to name the heavy prisoners that are released, while the Israeli condition has been that Israel will decide. One of the reasons for that, aside from the obvious security issues involved, is that it doesn't appear the cabinet would agree to a deal where Hamas picks out the heaviest terrorists, especially Smotrich and Ben Gvir would be against that. In this case, justifiably so, but certainly other people would join them. There wouldn't be a majority for that, at least it doesn't seem that way. And, of course, the really unbridgeable element is the question of a ceasefire. Hamas is looking for Israeli withdrawal. Hamas is looking for Israel to stop the war, or at least guarantee that talks that will stop the war will start after this. Israel does not want to do that. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing to insist that it's going to go into Rafah, but hasn't done so. The U.S. requested that Israel send a delegation to talk about how to approach the military operation in Rafah. Netanyahu sent Ron Dermer and Tzachi Hanegbi. Those are his two closest confidants to negotiate this. That means that Netanyahu is at least taking these talks very seriously. He didn't send people who would not have permission to make concessions. That's a good sign for the Biden administration. Dealing with criticism towards the administration that Biden wants Hamas to win or doesn't want Israel to finish the job, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, has said that Israel should finish Hamas, and Hamas should not have a safe haven anywhere in Gaza, but that a full-scale operation in Rafah is not the only way to finish off Hamas. Sullivan also said publicly what we've known for a while, that, quote, "Israel has not presented us or the world with a plan of how or where they would safely move those civilians." So while there have been IDF plans on the evacuation of civilians from Rafah, they haven't been presented to the United States, and the Americans are concerned that it's because the plans aren't very good. Therefore, they're insisting that Israel limit its operation. So Israel and its inability or unwillingness to produce a plan has definitely been part of the reason the Biden administration has got up on its hind legs and opposed this operation. Sullivan also said that he thinks that Hamas can be defeated without a major ground operation into Rafah. Honestly, I don't see how. But Maybe we'll learn more once these talks begin. One of the major elements that's complicating the Israeli ability to go into Rafah without a massive amount of international consequences and repercussions is because of increasing reports that northern Gaza is on the verge of experiencing famine. Now, famine isn't something the international community declares very often. In recent years, it's been declared in Somalia, it's been declared in South Sudan. It's only in very extreme cases. Right now, it's believed that northern Gaza is in danger of experiencing a famine, and a declaration of famine may be not far away. International organizations of aid are particularly concerned about this. I saw Bob Kitchen of the International Rescue Committee saying on CBS that a major attack in Rafah would result in the deaths of tens of thousands because they have nowhere to go safely. Again, a problem that is arising from the fact that Israel has not produced a good plan. Sullivan, with all this in mind, said, quote, "A major ground operation would be a mistake. It would lead to more innocent civilian deaths, worsen the already dire humanitarian crisis, deepen the anarchy in Gaza, and further isolate Israel internationally," end quote. And the truth is, right now, it's hard to argue with that all of these things would be the consequence. Israel needs to figure out how it can avoid all these things. But none of that stopped Netanyahu from making political capital off all of this. In the same talks that were leaked, he said, quote, "The attacks of the administration, American administration, are focused on me because I am preventing a Palestinian state," end quote. So, in some ways, instead of trying to heal the rift that's emerged with the Biden administration, Netanyahu is trying to make political capital off of this, something that we've seen several times, and raises the unfortunate possibility that this rift is something that Netanyahu is encouraging rather than discouraging. Netanyahu also said, quote, "There are elements in Israel that have joined up with the Americans to prevent an operation in Rafah," end quote. Clearly a dig at Benny Gantz. And there are a lot of new fault lines emerging inside the coalition with Benny Gantz. Um, it seems to me right now that Netanyahu is daring Gantz to leave the coalition and then seem like he's being irresponsible at a time of war. I think that's something that we'll cover more in episodes coming. In the meantime, a lot going on. The return of the IDF into Shifa Hospital on an operation, a cleanup operation, has raised a lot of questions about what's going on. Terrorists clearly returned to Shifa Hospital, and the IDF judged correctly that there was good enough reason to go back in there. They also now had experience going into the hospital. They knew the ins and outs of the hospital and figured they could go in without causing a major international incident. And they've basically done that. After a 5-hour battle, they took over the hospital again. The hospital is still under IDF control. They're still purifying it of Hamas operatives. 300 terrorists have been arrested, dozens killed, and apparently a major commander apprehended as well. But the reason that this raises some questions is how come Shifa, which was about as high profile a Hamas command center as you can have, was allowed to become Hamas HQ again so quickly after the Israeli military had taken it out last time? And Sullivan asked, quote, "Israel cleared Shifa once and Hamas came back into Shifa. This raises questions about how to ensure a sustainable campaign against Hamas so that it cannot regenerate and cannot retake territory." And that's perhaps the most important thing here. Israel needs to go into Rafah. I've said so many times. I continue to say so. But we're seeing that the areas that Israel has taken over haven't been meaningfully cleared out of Hamas. Hamas continues to be able to operate there as soon as the IDF goes out. Israel doesn't have a clear plan on how to sustain governance and keep Hamas out in the areas it takes over. That has not inspired confidence in the United States and elsewhere in their ability to do so in Rafah. So let's say Israel takes over Rafah. Um, Hamas will return there once Israel moves out its troops and focuses elsewhere. There has been no real government mechanism, no plan for what to do with territory that Israel has taken over. And that means that the operation is not leading to any strategic gains. So a lot of the lack of confidence that we're seeing in the Israeli operation comes from lapses in Israeli strategic planning, lapses that I hope Israel will soon begin to overcome by careful planning. The meeting between Dermer Hanegbi and American officials is a good chance for Israel to reach a better strategic plan on how to finish this war while having the support of the United States behind it. It's an opportunity to put this war on a different track, a more successful track. The concern that I have, and that many other people have, is that Netanyahu doesn't want this because being on the same track as the United States means that he can't make political capital out of opposing Biden. I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that a new chapter of cooperation between the Biden administration and Netanyahu starts as a result of these meetings. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Agent Smith asks, Kirby today says the Hamas response is, quote, within parameters. That means within parameters of something where a deal could be achieved. How does that square if they're ultimately insisting on a final withdrawal date? That is a great question. I think the Americans are not being completely honest about this issue. They want a ceasefire very badly. It would be a foreign policy achievement. It would get the extreme left off their ass. It would release the hostages, which is something that they want. It would allow a chance to get in U.S. aid. So there's a lot of reasons the U.S. wants this to be successful. And that's why the U.S. is constantly saying that they're cautiously optimistic and all those sorts of things, when really there isn't much of a cause for optimism. So I totally share your skepticism, Agent Smith. Meanwhile, Hario Super has an observation followed by a question. He says, It struck me that Israel might benefit from a delay in action. The news cycle is fleeting, and public interest tends to diminish over time. By letting the Israel-Palestine conflict fade a little from the headlines for a while, Israel could potentially gain the strategic upper hand they need, especially regarding Rafah. If they had made their move earlier, the immediate benefits would be clear. The global scrutiny and pressure from constant media coverage would be overwhelming. Maybe they're counting on the world's attention shifting elsewhere for a bit to proceed with their plans. What's your take on this angle? Okay, so I see what you're saying here, but I don't agree with this interpretation for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it's true that in most cases the news cycle is fleeting, but when it comes to Israel, the obsession on Israel with the international media is such that it doesn't really fleet. It doesn't really change. The focus on Israel has been monumentally um, rigid for 5 months now, and to believe that that will stop as the elections get near, think is not a realistic hope. And I haven't heard any Israelis say this. What tends to happen is that the pressure on Israel to stop their military operations increases. It does not decrease. That's what's happening here. Moshe Dayan said that in the 1950s, that Israel has a few weeks to complete any military operation before the pressure becomes too big. This is the longest operation Israel has ever had. Honestly, I'm almost surprised by how little pressure there is. There's plenty of pressure, but after so many months, I actually would have expected more if you'd asked me in October. And of course, the other problem is Israel has trouble waiting because of the hostages. There's a lot of pressure to get the hostages out before they die. On a strategic operational level, there really isn't much of a reason to delay the entrance. On a political level, for Netanyahu, there might be. And that's where my suspicions lie in regards to this particular delay. Okay, so that's the end of Israel Explained for today. I'm still on jail. I'm still in Twitter jail. Will be for 2 more days. But follow me anyway on academic_LA. I just put out a new episode of my history podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, about the 12 tribes and how they moved from worshiping various polytheistic Canaanite gods to worshiping the Israelite God. Um, Consider supporting my work on Patreon if you like it. And I will be back here as soon as there are new and exciting developments.